Hello, I love the way we've all spread out. So, my name's Ripesh Patel. I'm the Commercial and Procurement Strategy Director at Network Rail. This is Jonathan Curtis, who's the Procurement Operations Director at Network Rail. We're both part of the Route Services Commercial and Procurement team. So today we're going to talk a little bit about commercial models, CP7, what the regions are doing, how it's working, that kind of stuff. We've got a lot to cram in, so we're going to give you a lot of content, a lot of information. But we're available at the CMP stand later on as well, so if you want to chat through anything further or you've got any questions, anything like that, we can cover them off if we don't get time today. So I'm going to get straight into it because we've got a lot, as I said, to get into. So on Friday the 19th of May, so last month, we published our strategic business plan for the next control period 7, and that covers 2024 to 2029. What that plan sets out is all our railway activities that we're going to undertake during that 5-year period. The amount of money we've got from the government is £44 billion, which sounds huge, and it's great that we've got that amount of money. You may have heard things in the press and read about some things around how we're not investing in the railway this control period as much as we have done previously. Just to kind of set the facts straight, it's about £1.8 billion more than we got in the last control period when you adjust it for things like electricity prices and so on. So actually, on a like-to-like basis, it's pretty even in that regard. The development of the plan, it's taken about 2 years to get to, and there's a huge amount of engagement and interaction that occurs. There's work by the regions, the national functions. There's extensive engagement with the government, the ORR, the Office of Rail and Road, train operators and other stakeholders as well. So there's a huge amount of time and effort goes into getting to where we've got to now. Now, recognizing the challenging financial context that we've got, so we have to make difficult choices during CP7. There has to be trade-offs that have got to be made because of the environment that we're dealing with. And a key part of CP7 legacy should be a lower cost base than how we entered the control period. And we're looking to deliver around about 3.4 billion in efficiencies. That's on top of the 4 billion that we've delivered during CP6 already as we exit that. We're going to continue to develop the capability of our people and embed the management and maintenance reforms and modernisation programme that we've got underway, and that should deliver further efficiencies throughout the control period as well. And then we're making important investments in safety, which will realise not just during the control period, but beyond CP7 as well. And they include things like continued focus around level crossing closures, where feasible, increasing the use of technology to reduce the amount of time our people spend on track, and those kind of things. We're going to be investing in weather resilience, and that's a key part of CP7. So we're going to invest about £1.6 billion into weather resilience. That's things like earthworks and drainage renewals and those types of things. And then we're investing massively into freight and supporting the growth of that sector as well. So about 7.5% target is what we've got during the control period. And we're going to invest about 70 million-ish over the control period to make sure that we target high priority structures, renewals, to enable kind of longer and heavier freight services as well. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that we're going to be doing during that control period. We work within commercial and procurement. Our job is to make sure that we have an efficient, effective railway across the country. Just to give it some context, we transact with about 4,000 suppliers. We spend about 7.5 to about £8 billion a year. Now, if you've done the maths on 44 billion, that's about 85% of our funding is actually third-party spend. So it comes in and it's going straight out. So we've got to make sure that we're managing and that spend as effectively as we can do. One of the key themes and key aspects of the next control period is around becoming easier to work with. So we want to increase digital technologies and start to deploy systems and solutions where we can start to remove waste from the procurement process, streamline the procurement process as much as we can. We know from speaking to the supply chain how important it is around having visibility of our work bank, so it allows you to then invest and retain and attract the right skill sets and the people that you need within the industry as well. One of the things that is very, not very different, but different to what we're doing in CP7 versus CP6 is just how we're looking to contract and Jonathan in a second is going to kind of canter through the regional plans. The golden thread that kind of cuts across all of that is words like relationship, collaboration, partnership, and all of those kind of great things. And that's what we're looking to do is to deploy a very partnership, long-term relationship aspects to our arrangements during CP7. And then for me, finally, SMEs, huge part of our country and the economy and the important role that SMEs plays. The government has a target that 1 in every £3 is spent with SMEs. We've been doing that at Network Rail consistently for the entire control period and earlier than that. We're about 36%-ish, and we want to maintain that, and we want to continue that. So we've got a 6-point action plan that talks to engagement, pre-procurement activities, supply management. We're going to enhance that and evolve that even further to make it more simpler. So procurement becomes more and more accessible in a simpler way in terms of how you engage with Network Rail. So that's me. I'm going to hand over to Jonathan now, who's going to talk a little bit about each of the regions.
Thank you, Ripesh, and good afternoon, everyone. As Ripesh said, this is going to be a very much of a whistle-stop tour of the region's plans for CP7, because there's quite a bit of detail in the slide pack. But if I move on, starting with Eastern Region, they've set their principles out, and these principles will drive how their strategy goes forward. It's based on putting the passengers first, sharing information with the supply chain, agreeing the commercial levers to bring best value, and also selecting the right supplier for the right work. The model is underpinned, underpinned through creation of Eastern Routes partnerships, based around 4 discipline areas, specific lots, with each having suppliers able to take the bigger complex works, but also undertake the lower risk works. This will allow Eastern to broaden their supply chain and hopefully attract SMEs, again, reflecting on some of the comments that Ripesh has just highlighted from the strategy. Sorry, wrong slide, looking at the wrong screen. Moving on to North West and Central, they developed their strategy for CP7, but they're also looking ahead to CP8. So they're trying to lay the foundations for the control period afterwards. And this is built around the intelligent client model, integrating works between their capital delivery teams, their works delivery and their asset management teams. And those initiatives we supported by a procurement strategy based around frameworks tailored to the type and the size of the projects that they're talking about, providing entry channels for SMEs, utilising the NEC4 contracts. We've moved as a company towards NEC4 over the last 12 months in preparation for CP7, and aligning that with the principles of the government's construction playbook. They plan to take their strategy forward in 2 phases. Phase 1 will be the smaller contracts up to the value of about 7 million, with an aim to give greater work bank visibility. And then phase 2 running slightly behind that for multidisciplinary frameworks in contracts in excess of 7 million. Their existing frameworks, if you're on those already for track and signalling, will continue. They're not part of those 2 phases. They've run for several years yet and will continue to use those frameworks. Now moving on to Scotland. Scotland's strategy is to build longer-term strategic frameworks with their relationships with their suppliers, integrating the best that the Network Rail teams can offer with the best from the supply chain. They also aim to plan their asset interventions to make best of route availability and route opportunities, delivering customer-focused asset strategies. They again will have multiple levels of contracting arrangements. They're using 3 levels: simple contracts for the low complexity projects, strategic partnerships for the multi-asset renewals and enhancement schemes, and an enterprise model for the really large schemes based on the lessons they've learned from the Leavenmouth project. They're planning 3 frameworks for CP7, all of which are anticipated to be a 5-year duration with extension options beyond that. That's divided into civil engineering, again with 4 lots within that. Significant spend on that, circa 900 million expected. Signalling, power and communications, about 150 million on that area, and electrification with an indicative value of 250. And that's a bit more detail on those strategies for you, the 3 there with the lots shown. Moving on to Southern. They've developed their strategy around 3 principles. The first is how we work, which they're building around collaboration, being aligned and agile. How we develop, including innovation, digitizing and learning from what we've done before. And how we plan to succeed, looking at making sure that people are looked after, their incentives are right, and the outcome-based projects and aims for the projects. They've launched their Southern Integrated Delivery Model, SID it's referred to, you may hear it called SID. It's multi-party agreements based on the NR21 terms and conditions with a 10-year agreement, or that has got a 5-year break clause. And it incorporates opportunities for increased profits. So if a supplier does more than was originally planned to do, more than the base, they'll get an increased profit share. If they deliver what they said, they'll get the profit they asked for, but of course it works the other way if they're under-delivering. So it's not all good news. But the opportunity is there. And then finally, but by no means least, Wales and Western. They've adopted also the intelligent client model, aiming to be less prescriptive and reduce duplication and manage risk. They aim to do this by working collaboratively with their partners. And they've got core roles and capabilities and trusting the supply chain to deliver the areas that we don't have the expertise in. As you can see from the diagram, and I'll leave this up for a few seconds, the suppliers will be involved right from the or can be involved if the project demands it, from the technical development stage, so prior to finalising the requirements of what they want to do. I'm conscious there's a lot of information on there, so I'll leave that for a second. And then moving on to their final slide, or not the next slide, sorry, they've got already appointed partners for their buildings and civils and their electrification and plant frameworks. So you can see there across Wales and Western, the suppliers that have been chosen to deliver those partnerships. Again, I'll leave you that for a second or two. I'm not going to read it. And then finally, they will continue to use the strategies they've got on the slide for their remaining assets. So again, track and signalling carries on with the current suppliers while that framework is still in place. And then they move on to telecoms, BAM and CAM and enhancements with different strategies for each of those to follow. But the first ones are already in place, and those will follow as they needed, as the current ones expire. So I think that's it. So thank you very much. I'll hand over to Leanna for questions.
Round of applause, I think. Oh, I had to remember to take my sunglasses off then. It's very bright in this tent, isn't it? Thank you so much. That was a really interesting presentation. You can tell from the audience and the number of photos that were being taken.
I could see the photos being taken,
yes,
which is
lots
great.
and lots of photography.
I didn't think you'd want me to read it all.
So I imagine we'll have quite a few questions at the end. But I'll take the first question, given that it's my prerogative as the chair. What is it actually like on the ground to work with Network Rail? So if you're supplying into Network Rail, what's it like for that supplier?
I can answer that, and then you can kind of pitch in. So if you're an existing supplier, I think the first thing that will hit you is how important safety is to Network Rail and our safety culture and our approach to safety. Being like any heavy industry, safety is absolutely paramount. I think the second thing that probably hits you is and this is an evolution of what we've been doing, but how much emphasis we want to put on partnerships and relationships and how we want to help the supply chain grow and drive innovation. We've historically had a mindset of we've done that before and we've always done that, so we'll continue to go down that route. I think that is changing, and we're changing our approach to be able to drive, wanting to have innovation driven by the supply chain back into Network Rail, and that's a key part of what CP7 and the next control period is going to be all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fair to say we're a risk-averse industry, and in some ways that's absolutely right. Some types of risk are safety risks never to be taken. But in some ways, that risk, for example, around innovation, I think is a really obvious one, and that's where all my interest lies, obviously, as an innovation manager. So thinking then about that topic of innovation and looking at innovative procurement, does that kind of include multi-organisational partnerships between the big players and the SMEs? What kind of innovation are we talking about in the process?
Innovation can take either of those or multiple channels, really, depending on what it is. And it could be, we publish something called problem statements. So suppliers can come and respond to our problem statements and explain how they think they can have a solution for that, which will then be evaluated and discussed. We also operate something where suppliers can come and pitch their proposals to us, and then if that proposal is selected to go forward, I think they submit a video. If that proposal is selected to go forward, then it's given to the technical experts to look at and evaluate, and some of those then generate through to future business with REL. But equally, we expect our big suppliers on our current contracting arrangements, particularly the longer term frameworks, to introduce innovation as and when that becomes appropriate to what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the longer the framework, the more we expect people to try and support that process.
Innovate, yeah, exactly. And where, for the audience, where can people find that information about the events and about how to submit videos?
Most of the information that we have available is on our own website. And if you come to the CMP table in the back of the Network Rail Village tent, it's another hot tent, I'm afraid. If you come to the back corner of that, we've got some displays there that show where all the information is available. It is on our webpage. I'm not showing anything there that you couldn't find, but we have got QR codes and posters and information sheets in the town, so people can come and have a look at that and talk to us and colleagues of ours that are there if they want more information.
And innovation, for me, can be difficult in a monopolistic organisation like ours and our sector and so on. I've worked in different industries and different sectors, and where there is competition out there, you kind of look at the competition and see what's going on, and then you kind of develop your solutions to meet that. We haven't got that in the UK because of, we're the only infrastructure provider in the UK, so it can be more difficult. And then mindsets become kind of built around, as I said earlier, we've done it this way, so we'll continue to do it that way because it's safe, it works. If it's not broken, let's not try and fix it. We want to move away from some of that mindset. The other challenge we also have is, whichever way you look at it, we are a public sector organisation, and we've got to abide by legislation and regulation in terms of what we do. So where I've worked in the private sector, for example, from a procurement perspective, it's far simpler to be able to say, you've got that product, I really like that, let's start using that immediately. We've got to make sure that we're creating an open, transparent, fair procurement process to be able to make sure we deliver what we need to from a legislative perspective. And that also adds complexity. And then, as I said, safety is so important. Then we've got the product acceptance process, which can then add some additional time and effort into getting products out there physically on the railway. But it's such a key part to make sure that it's safe, secure, and it does what it needs to do. But again, we recognise that we need to improve that process, and we need to think about how we can simplify that, not taking away the safety aspect, but from a process aspect, so it's easier for organisations to be able to get their product out onto the railway.
Yeah, I was going to say add some additional time. Very optimistic way of phrasing that. Very optimistic. I like it though. So I think probably right to go out to the audience and see if we have any audience questions at the moment.
None? Great. Right.
Doesn't mean you're not off the hook. No question.
There's one
Gentleman
here.
here.
There's one here.
Oh, we'll come to you next.
Thanks very much, sir. You mentioned legislation and the impact of being a public sector organization. Have you considered the impact of, if and when it happens, Great British Railways at all? How does that sort of affect any of this?
The legislation we have to comply with the procurement affects any public sector organisation in Network Rail. So the legislation for procurement won't change because of GBR. Coincidentally, it is changing because procurement legislation changes in October 2024. So there are significant changes for every public sector organisation, from local authorities to Network Rail, High Speed 2 and GBR in the future. So there is significant changes coming in procurement, but it's not as a result of, in terms of legislation, because of GBR. GBR may expand what we do, may change, the details are still evolving, but it doesn't change the sort of the regulatory framework that we work in.
It's a good question. I mean, absolutely, we should be looking at, if we're going to form this new entity and a new organisation that is different to what we've currently got, it's a good time to revisit what we do from, say, a procurement perspective. As Jonathan said, there are rules that we have to adhere to. They're not going to change. But what the GBR transition team are working extremely hard on is looking at how we can change mindsets, the culture, process, how do we improve a lot of that stuff. And they've done a lot of listening exercises with the supply chain to understand gripes, problems, where improvement opportunities lie, and they are feeding that back in. So we look at this as an opportunity to see what the art of the possible is from a kind of a procurement perspective, and don't default to position to it's legislative, so we just have to do it kind of perspective. So I'm hoping there'll be some differences that you'll see.
Thank you. Valeria Sesko, Head of Procurement at RSSB. You've demonstrated quite a wide range of contracts and categories portfolio, which obviously are all under procurement and commercial team at Network Rail. On a slightly different note, how do you approach equality, diversity and inclusion aspect across any of these categories or portfolios or in your contracts or tenders?
Really, I'll take that one, Jonathan, if you want. It's a really good question. So I'm the diversity and inclusion chair for our function, our directorate, which is Route Services. And we've got a huge amount of work that we're putting into our internal organisation. We've got some great employee networks that are looking to enhance diversity and inclusion across Network Rail. We've got a great in-house team, a central team, and our HR functions enable and support us extremely well. What we're doing is working with them to understand how we can apply some of that great stuff that we do internally to our supply chain. Now, at the moment, through our PQQ process and tendering process, we've got some questions that are diversity and inclusion related. I'm looking to enhance that, and we're about to kick off a piece of work called the Inclusive Procurement Programme. And that Inclusive Procurement Programme involves us looking across that entire procurement life cycle, so everything from how we develop business requirements through to how we take them to market, through to the contract itself, and then how we manage the supplier, that entire life cycle, to see what we can do from a diversity and inclusion perspective and what we should be asking our supply chain, therefore, to meet and adhere to. And I'm working with the wider DFT family, the Department for Transport family, so National Highways, TfL, HS2 and us, and we're going to look to align on that. And so we can start to influence the supply chain as a collective, because we recognise as a collective, our buying power, what we do with the supply chain is pretty vast.
Yeah, many of us in the room, of course, will know that that's also being reflected in areas like government funding as well. So slowly but surely there are kind of more requirements around EDI that are building up there, and there's more process to go through. So I think, again, it's about like getting that balance right, isn't it, of making sure we're supporting SMEs, particularly SMEs, in that process. One of the questions I always used to get is, how am I supposed to hire someone else when I'm a two-person organisation working out of a shed? Yeah. And I do think that's a fair point. You know, it's not just about bringing someone in just to say, oh, we've met a diversity quota. It's about all of the work and the processes around that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant question. Anything else from the audience? Just here?
Hi, Richard Flanagan from Unipark Rail. You've shown lots of slides today, all different styles, and then mentioned that there'll be visibility of the pipeline. How consistent and how available will that pipeline be from the various regions?
The pipeline we published on our website, and again, the details is on our website, but the details and the QR link I've got available in the tent, covers all regions. I'm not saying it covers every procurement. Things change. Obviously, dates in there may change, but the aim is that all procurement is shown on that pipeline from all regions. And you can filter it by region, or you can look at it as a whole. You can filter it by category. So hopefully the information one's there, but I'm not saying it's perfect, because we know it's not, and it's an evolving process that we're trying to get better. I'm also trying to automate it. We talk about digitisation of other things. We're trying to digitise that internally, because it is a bit of a mammoth task to collate it every time we publish it.
It's a good question, Richard, and I think historically we just haven't been good enough putting our hands up at sharing that pipeline and what that demand looks like, which means then from a supply chain perspective, it's very difficult to gear yourself up to respond to that supply chain. So, you know, we have a lot of feast and famine type demand. That level of variability it causes nothing but problems to the supply chain. So we totally recognise that, and we have to improve. Now, I'm hoping that devolution will facilitate that. So now, rather than doing stuff and looking across nationally, saying this is what our cake kind of looks like, carving it up into its 5 regions, actually will allow us to hopefully, kind of fingers crossed, be able to provide more meaningful data, more meaningful information, and allow the supply chain to be able to respond accordingly.
It's probably worth adding to that. On the same page, we publish our contract register, so existing contracts. So suppliers who don't want to contract with us direct, but want to see who our tier 1 suppliers are, they can look there and they can see which frameworks we've awarded, which contracts, and who to.
Brilliant. Anyone else? Great. One question from me then. What kind of lessons are we learning internationally? So are there lessons that we can learn from the way that things are done in other countries? Is that something that we're drawing in? Or is it very kind of Britain-specific? What does that balance kind of look like?
I think if you walk around the whole show today, you'll see a lot of our suppliers work in multiple countries, and it's the same products. Yeah, some of the differences relate to gauge, etc., but the same products are used throughout most of the mainland railways. So it is an international supply chain. One of my colleagues, particularly on the signalling area, they're working closely because we're rolling out new signalling systems, as are most of Europe, so they meet to discuss the latest sort of technology on that and how that works. And there's quite a lot of dialogue at that level of different subject matters throughout the... And of course, if I'm going to a supplier to buy something, but they've already developed something new for another part of the railway somewhere else in the world, they'll want to sell me their latest innovation anyway. So we all benefit from, whether it's Network Rail pushing innovation or an overseas railway pushing innovation. Once they've done it, the supply chain will want to sell it to us. So we benefit from that.
Yeah, the railway's the railway to an extent across the world, but there are nuances and differences that sit locally, and there's lots of learning we can have from other industries, from Deutsche Bahn, ProRail, whatever it may be. And we're doing that, but we're doing that kind of holistically for things like signalling, electrification, and track, and so on. But we're trying to do that more kind of in the verticals as well. So things like maintenance or earthworks, drainage, and those types of activities. So ProRail, for example, have outsourced all of their maintenance, and they do it by a patch, basically. There's a lot to learn in terms of, could we do something similar, or could we learn from them in terms of what went well, what kind of commercial arrangements did they put in place, how they incentivize the supply chain to deliver that, and things like that. So there's a lot of activity going on, but in reality, it probably could be stronger, I think. But hopefully over the next control period, we'll start to strengthen some of those things.
Always more lessons to be learned.
Yeah, absolutely. You never stop learning. Every day's a school day.
Every day's a school day. Well, we're just coming up to the end, so I have one final question. What's the number one thing that you like to see from a supplier? So if you could kind of have a dream list for a supplier, maybe it's behaviours, or maybe it's something about that supplier in particular, what's top of that list that when you see that you go, they know what they're doing? It's a very difficult question, but I thought the audience might appreciate it.
There's so many different initiatives we're trying to work on at once, whether it's carbon reduction, whether it's innovation, efficiency. I don't think there's any one area I want a supplier to excel on. If they're excelling on any one of those, that would be great.
Brilliant.
For me, yeah, it's really tough. It's like saying to your partner, what's the one thing that you love about them? I would probably say...
You should all feel very flattered, by the way.
I'll probably say it not about my wife, but around your question...
This is being recorded.
I say behaviours, because I think that's the kind of foundation. If they've got the right behaviours and the right mindset as a result of those behaviours, then they will probably deliver everything that we need them to deliver, because they'll partner with us, they'll foster a long-term relationship with us, and they'll start to help us, and we will start to help them grow collectively.
That makes sense. Absolutely. Well, that was really fascinating. Thank you so much. I think we'll have another round of applause.